My name is Claire Donovan. I am 33 years old. I am a single mother. And for 6 years, I scrubbed bathroom tiles, made beds, and folded towel corners into little triangles in rooms that belonged to strangers. That was my life. And my family made sure I never forgot how small they thought that life was. The moment I am about to tell you happened on a Thursday evening in November. Thanksgiving. 14 people around one table. The candles my mother spent 45 minutes arranging. The wine my father picked to impress one specific guest. And my father, Gerald Donovan, standing at the head of the table with his glass raised high, his chest wide, and that performance smile stretched across his face. He said, "I want to introduce my family. My older daughter Sandra is a cardiologist at Mercy General, and my younger daughter Claire." He paused. He actually paused for effect. "She is the help." The table erupted. Real laughter. Comfortable laughter. The kind that tells you everyone already agreed on the joke before you arrived. My daughter Sophie was 9 years old. She was sitting right beside me with her little holiday dress and her hair in braids. She found my hand under the table and she whispered 4 words that split the room in half for me. She said, "Mama, are you embarrassed?" I was not embarrassed. Not anymore. Because there was one man at that table who had not laughed. And he was the one man in that room my father was desperately trying to impress. People always assume that the child who gets labeled the failure was always a little broken, that there was always something off. But that is not how my story started. I was not broken. I was just not Sandra. Sandra Donovan was 4 years older than me, and from the day I was old enough to understand comparison, I understood that she was the standard. Sandra got straight A's. Sandra played violin. Sandra never talked back. Sandra cried quietly and cleaned up after herself. And my father told every single person who would listen that Sandra was going to be a doctor from the time she was 8 years old. I was not interested in being Sandra. I had questions. I pushed back on rules that did not make sense. I wanted to know why, not just what. My father called that attitude. My mother called it exhausting. My father's name for me at family dinners was "our complicated one," said with a laugh that was never quite warm, but I was not a bad student. I graduated with a degree in hospitality management from a solid state university. I had internships. I had ambition. I had a plan. What I did not have was the job I expected to be waiting for me when I walked across that stage. The economy was tight the year I graduated. The hospitality sector was contracting. I sent out 94 applications in 8 months. I got 3 interviews and no offers. My father called me every Sunday during those 8 months. Not to encourage me, to remind me how Sandra had 4 job offers before she even finished her residency application. Then I met Ryan. Ryan was charming in the specific way that certain men are charming when they can sense that a woman needs to feel chosen. He was confident and loud, and he made me feel like the most interesting person in any room when we were together. My family loved him. My father loved him. He shook my father's hand at the right angle and talked about investments at the right volume, and my father decided he was excellent before Ryan had finished his first drink. We got married when I was 24. Sophie was born a year later, and then Ryan left. He did not leave slowly. He did not leave with a conversation or a warning. He left the way a power cut happens. 1 second everything is running, and then the lights are just out. Sophie was 14 months old. I came home from a grocery run and half his things were gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter that said he was not ready for this life and that he was sorry. That was the whole note. I called my parents. My mother cried. My father said, "This is what happens when you rush into things," which was interesting because he had been the loudest voice at our wedding saying Ryan was a great catch. I had no job. I had a 14-month-old. I had 2 months of savings and an apartment lease with 3 months left. I had a hospitality degree that had not yet opened a single professional door, so I did what I had to do. I found a job listing at the Harrington Grand Hotel, full-time housekeeper. Benefits, stable hours. It was not what my degree was for. It was not what I had imagined. But it was real, and it was immediate, and it would keep the lights on and food in Sophie's stomach. I took it. When I told my father, there was a pause on the phone that lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. And then he said, "So you are going to be a maid?" Not a question. Just a sentence he let sit in the air like a verdict. I told him it was temporary. He said, "I hope so." 6 years later, I was still at the Harrington, and my father had turned "she works at a hotel" into the family's favorite punchline. But something was quietly happening inside those hotel walls that my father knew absolutely nothing about. There is a version of the hotel that guests see, and a version that the staff lives in. I spent 6 years in the second one, and it taught me things that no degree on any wall ever could. The Harrington Grand was a 4-star property in the center of the city. Marble lobby, gold fixtures, a chandelier in the main hall that took a team of 3 people 2 full days to clean every quarter. The guests who stayed there were business travelers, executives, the occasional celebrity, and the kind of wealthy families who treated a 4-star hotel the way most people treat a budget motel, casually, without much thought. I was assigned to floors 7 through 10. 12 rooms a day was the standard expectation. On busy weeks, 14. I worked fast and I worked clean. My supervisor, a compact woman named Rosa, who had been with the Harrington for 19 years, told me within my first month that I had the fastest room turnover on the floor and the highest guest satisfaction scores in my section. I did not feel proud of that at first. I felt useful. There is a difference. But I kept showing up. Because Sophie needed her daycare paid for. Sophie needed new shoes every few months because she grew like she was in a competition. Sophie needed a mother who did not fall apart. What I did not expect was how much I would start to see. When you clean the same rooms week after week, when you listen to the way guests talk on their phones during check-in, when you watch how housekeeping teams are managed and mismanaged, when you notice which rooms have the highest complaint rate and why, when you observe how front desk errors create housekeeping crises that nobody upstream ever accounts for, you start to develop a picture of how a hotel actually functions from the inside out. I began keeping a notebook. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the beginning of a movie. But it was not dramatic at the time. It started because I needed somewhere to put my thoughts so they would stop running in circles at night when Sophie was asleep, and I was too wired to rest. I wrote down things I noticed. Inefficiencies, patterns, moments where a different process would have saved 20 minutes of labor or prevented a complaint that ended up in a manager's inbox. My father called every few weeks. The conversations were brief. He would ask how the cleaning was going. He would say it in a tone that made cleaning sound like a life sentence. I would say fine. He would say he hoped I was looking for something better. I would say I was fine. He would say Sandra had just been promoted, or Sandra had just spoken at a conference, or Sandra had just bought a new car. I would say that was wonderful. We would hang up. My mother was gentler, but not by much. She would send articles about online certification programs with little notes attached that said things like, "Thought this might help you get back on track." As if I had derailed from something. As if where I was standing was not a real place. At Christmas that year, the first one after Ryan left, my father introduced me to his colleague as our daughter who is figuring things out. I was 27 years old. I had a clean apartment, a healthy child, and a job I showed up to every single day without fail. I was not figuring things out. I was doing them. But in my family's language, doing them did not count unless it looked the right way from the outside. I stopped arguing. I stopped explaining. I put my energy somewhere else. I put it into the notebook. And one morning, on floor 9, in the middle of making up room 914, I looked up to find a man standing in the open doorway watching me. not in a threatening way, with quiet, focused attention, like someone who recognized something they had been looking for. His name was Marcus Webb, and everything was about to change. He was not the most powerful-looking man I had ever seen. He was not tall in the way that fills a doorway. But when Marcus Webb stood somewhere, everything around him seemed to go slightly quieter. Like the room itself was paying attention. He was staying in room 916 for the third week in a row. Long-term corporate stays were common at the Harrington. Executives who were in town for extended projects, consultants engaged on multi-month contracts, investors doing due diligence on local assets. They became background characters after a while. Familiar faces who nodded and said, "Good morning," the way you nod at a neighbor you know by sight but not by name. I had noticed Marcus Webb because he was orderly in a way that most long-term guests were not. His room was almost always neat before I arrived. He never left towels on the floor. He stacked his used room service trays by the door so they were easier to collect. These were small things. But in 6 years of cleaning hotel rooms, small things stand out. That morning, I was running a tight schedule. Room 914 was taking longer than it should because the previous guest had left the bathroom in a condition I will not describe in detail. I was on my knees cleaning the base of the toilet when I heard footsteps slow outside the open door and stop. I stood. I turned. Marcus Webb was standing in the hallway with his key card in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. He was not blocking the door. He was looking at my cart. Specifically, he was looking at the clipboard I used to track my room list, and clipped to the back of the clipboard, visible because I had not yet slid it under the main sheet, was the edge of my notebook. He looked at me. He said, "Is that a systems log?" I said, "No, it is personal notes." He said, "May I ask what kind of personal notes a housekeeper keeps on a housekeeping cart?" I almost said nothing. My instinct after 6 years of being underestimated was to deflect and move on. But something in the way he asked, without condescension, without humor, like a person who genuinely wanted to know, made me answer honestly. I said, "Notes on how this place could run better, from the bottom up." He looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "That is the most useful sentence I have heard from anyone at this property in 3 weeks." He introduced himself. I told him my name. He asked if I had time to talk after my shift. I told him I had a daughter to pick up by 5. He said tomorrow morning then, if that worked, over coffee in the lobby before my shift started. I almost said no. A different version of me, the version that had spent years believing what my family reflected back at me, would have said no, would have assumed it was not serious, would have assumed she was not the kind of person whose observations warranted a lobby meeting with a man like Marcus Webb. But I said yes. And the next morning I sat across from him with my notebook open on the table between us, and I talked for 45 minutes about everything I had seen and recorded over 6 years of working the floors of the Harrington Grand. I talked about the disconnect between front desk forecasting and housekeeping staffing that caused chronic labor spikes on weekends. I talked about the guest complaint cycle that started in check-in and ended up being blamed on housekeeping every single time, even though housekeeping was almost never the origin point. Marcus Webb listened to every word. He took notes of his own. And when I finished, he looked across the table and said something I had not expected. He said, "How would you like to actually do something with all of this?" My heart stopped. And then it started again. Faster. There are moments in life where someone holds a door open for you, and the hardest part is not finding the door. It is believing you are allowed to walk through it. Marcus Webb was not offering me charity. That was the first thing he made very clear. He said, "I am not in the habit of rescuing people. I am in the habit of finding people who see things other people miss and figuring out whether there is a business in what they see." He told me who he was, Marcus ran Web Hospitality Consulting, a mid-size firm that advised hotel groups and property developers on operational efficiency, staff retention strategy, and guest experience systems. His clients were regional chains, boutique hotel groups, and occasionally larger brands looking for an outside assessment of specific problem properties. He had been staying at the Harrington Grand because one of his clients, an investment group considering acquiring the property, had hired him to assess it from the inside. He had been doing exactly what I had been doing, observing, documenting, and looking for patterns. The difference was that he was doing it from the guest side. And he had reached a ceiling. He said my notebook had broken through that ceiling in 45 minutes. What he was proposing was this. He would mentor me through the process of formalizing my observations into a consulting framework. He would teach me the language and structure of hospitality consulting. I would contribute the ground-level operational intelligence that no executive or outside consultant could gather without years of embedded access. We would develop a methodology together, staff-level operational auditing, something that had no real market equivalent yet. At first, it would be his client base. Later, if the model proved itself, we would look at what it could become independently. He was not offering me equity that day. He was offering me a seat at a table where I would have to earn every inch. And he made that clear, too. I sat with it for a week. I turned it over at night after Sophie went to sleep. I thought about the ways it could go wrong. I thought about what it would mean to fail at something that felt this close to real. I thought about my father's voice saying, "I hope you are looking for something better." And I thought about how much I did not want him to be the reason I said yes or no to anything. I said yes because Sophie looked at me one evening while I was working through Marcus's preliminary worksheet at the kitchen table, and she said, "Mama, you look like you are doing homework." And I said I was. And she said, "Is it good homework?" And I looked at what I had written and I said, "Yes, actually, I think it is very good homework." I called Marcus the next morning. We started meeting twice a week, early mornings before my shift, or evenings after Sophie was in bed through video call. He was a structured, precise teacher who did not soften things unnecessarily. When my frameworks were vague, he said so. When my analysis was strong, he said that too. He treated every session like it mattered because for him, it did. For me, it was the first time in years that my thinking was being taken seriously by someone with the standing to evaluate it properly. I told no one. Not my mother. Not anyone from the neighborhood. Certainly not my father. I told no one because the version of me my family had filed away did not match what I was becoming. And I was not ready to fight that battle yet. I needed to build it first. I needed it to be real first. I needed it to be something they could not dismiss with a pause on a phone call and a comparison to Sandra. So I kept cleaning rooms during the day and I kept building something at night, week by week, month by month. And slowly, steadily, something remarkable began to happen. Nobody saw it happening. That was the point. The most powerful things are built in the quiet, in the hours nobody is watching, in the years nobody is counting. The first year was mostly education. Marcus was methodical about it. Before I could consult on anything, I had to understand the full language of what I was walking into. He sent me coursework. Not a formal degree program, but a curated sequence of hotel operations management modules, financial modeling basics, HR analytics, and service design frameworks. The kind of curriculum you might piece together across 3 or 4 graduate electives if you knew where to look. I studied after Sophie's bedtime and during my lunch breaks in the Harrington staff lounge. I kept my notebook locked in a drawer at home. I kept a second, more structured document on my laptop where I was beginning to formalize the methodology Marcus and I were developing together. He gave it a working name: Ground-Level Audit Intelligence. The idea was simple but underrepresented in the consulting space. Most hospitality consultants entered a property from the top. They interviewed management, reviewed financial statements, analyzed guest satisfaction reports, and issued recommendations. What almost none of them did was build their diagnostic picture from the bottom of the operational chain upward. From the people who actually touch the product every day, the housekeepers, the maintenance team, the night concierge, the laundry staff. We believed that the deepest and most accurate signal about a hotel's systemic health lived in those people, and we believed we could build a repeatable process for extracting, structuring, and presenting that signal in a language executives could act on. By the end of year 2, we had a pilot project. Marcus brought me in, quietly, on a consulting engagement for a regional hotel group that was hemorrhaging guest satisfaction scores at 2 of its 5 properties. I was not listed as a consultant. I was listed as a field researcher. The title was modest on purpose. We were not ready to lead with my name or my background. We were ready to lead with the work. I spent 6 weeks at each property. I moved through them the way I had moved through the Harrington, observing, listening, asking questions in the staff break room rather than the boardroom. I documented everything. I built a diagnostic report for each property that was 40 pages long and organized around 7 core operational pressure points. When Marcus presented the findings to the client, he told me afterward that the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something lands differently than expected. The client's regional director said it was the most granular and actionable assessment they had ever received. He asked who built the research framework. Marcus said, "My partner." When he told me that, I was sitting in my car outside Sophie's school waiting to pick her up. I read his message 3 times. I looked at the school's front door. I watched Sophie come out with her backpack bouncing and her lunchbox swinging and her face open and bright, the way a 9-year-old's face is when she does not yet know that the world is sometimes very small about people like her mother. I thought, not for her. Not anymore. At home that night, I did not say anything. I made dinner. We watched a movie together on the couch. Sophie fell asleep against my shoulder and I carried her to bed and tucked her in and stood in the doorway of her room for a long moment in the dark. Then I went back to the kitchen table and I worked for 3 more hours. By year 3, Marcus and I had registered a formal business entity. We had 4 paying clients. We had a documented methodology that was unlike anything currently offered in the consulting market. By year 4, the business had a name on a contract. Claire Donovan was listed as co-founder and director of field intelligence at Donovan Web Consulting Group. My father still called me on Sundays. He still asked how the cleaning was going. I still said fine. By the time most people find out about a fire, it has already been burning for years. What my family did not know was that I had been building something that was almost too big to keep quiet. Year 4 was the year everything shifted from promising to real. We landed our first national client, a mid-size hotel management company with 22 properties across 8 states, brought Donovan Web Consulting Group on retainer. They had been bleeding money on staff retention and could not identify the source. 3 of their GMs had resigned in 11 months. Guest scores were declining at properties that had no obvious physical or service issues. Nobody could explain it. We explained it. It took us 9 weeks and a full deployment of the ground-level audit intelligence methodology across 4 of their properties. The final report was 67 pages. The executive summary alone generated a 2-hour meeting that ended with the client's CEO saying he felt like we had done a full MRI of his company and finally told him what was actually wrong. The intervention recommendations we gave them over the following 6 months saved them an estimated $1.4 million in turnover-related replacement costs. They renewed their retainer. They referred us to 2 other groups. I moved Sophie and me out of the apartment we had lived in since Ryan left and into a 2-bedroom place with a 2nd bathroom and a backyard. Sophie could not believe the backyard. She ran out the first evening and stood in the middle of the grass in her socks and spun in a circle. I watched her from the back door and I thought, this is what it is for. I bought a slightly newer car. I did not buy anything that looked like what it actually was. I was not ready for questions. I was not ready for my family's reaction to a truth they had done nothing to deserve access to. My father called in the fall of that year. He said he had heard from my aunt that I had moved to a new place. He asked if the hotel had given me a raise. I said I was doing well. He said that was good. And then, in the same breath, he said, Sandra had just been featured in a medical journal, and had I seen the article? I said I had not. He said he would send it. He sent it that evening. I read it. Sandra was brilliant. She always had been. My issue was never with Sandra. My issue was with the fact that in my father's world, there was only room for one kind of success, and it had to look a specific way to count. By year 5, we were turning down projects we did not have capacity for. By year 6, Marcus received an acquisition inquiry from Langford Group, a national hospitality consulting firm that wanted to absorb our methodology and our client base. They had been watching us for 18 months. They came with a number. That number was $3,400,000. I sat in the conference room across from their representatives, and I kept my hands very still in my lap, and I kept my face very neutral, and I thought about my father on the phone asking if the hotel had given me a raise. We negotiated for 6 weeks. We pushed the number. We protected contractual terms for our existing clients. We secured positions for our small staff, and when the final agreement was signed, my share of the acquisition was $1,800,000. I did not celebrate loudly. I went home. I made Sophie's favorite dinner. I told her over the table that some good things had happened at work. She asked if that meant she could get the bike with the extra gears. I said yes. She could absolutely get the bike. I called no one else. And then, 2 weeks after the acquisition closed, my mother called to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner. She said there was a special guest this year, a very important business contact of my father's named Marcus Webb. I set the phone down very slowly. Some moments feel like coincidence, but the closer you look, the more they reveal themselves to be exactly what they were always going to be. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after my mother said that name. Marcus Webb. My mother kept talking. She said my father had been cultivating a relationship with Mr. Webb for months. She said he had met him through a mutual contact at a real estate networking event in the spring. She said Gerald believed this man could be a significant partner for Donovan Property Holdings, my father's small commercial real estate company, which had been struggling quietly for the last 2 years with 2 underperforming assets and a lease portfolio that was not generating what it once had. My mother said, "Your father is very excited. This could be something real for the business. Please be on your best behavior." I did not laugh. I wanted to, but I did not. I called Marcus that same evening. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Did you know whose daughter I was when you first spoke to me at the Harrington?" He said, "No. I found out 3 months in, when your father's name appeared in a networking email from a mutual contact. I recognized your last name. And then I did some connecting." I said, "And you did not tell me." He said, "I was waiting to see if you would mention it. And when you did not, I decided it was not relevant to the work." I said, "It is relevant now." He said, "Yes, it is." There was a pause, and then Marcus said, "I received an invitation to a Thanksgiving dinner at your father's house. He believes I am considering a partnership with his real estate firm." Another pause. "I am not." I asked him what he planned to do. He said, "I think that depends on what you want to do." I thought about it for 2 days. I thought about every Sunday phone call. I thought about the Christmas introduction. I thought about our daughter who is figuring things out. I thought about Sophie in her holiday dress asking if I was embarrassed. And I made a decision. I told Marcus I wanted to come to Thanksgiving. I told him I wanted to sit at that table and I wanted to see it play out the way it was going to play out, because I already knew my father well enough to know exactly what was coming, and when it came, I would be ready. Marcus said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I have been sure for 6 years. I just did not have the right moment." He said, "Then I will see you at Thanksgiving." I told Sophie we were going to Grandma and Grandpa's for the holiday. She was excited. She loved the house. She loved the food. She loved her cousin who always came to these dinners. I did not tell her anything else. I chose my outfit carefully. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to signal anything before the time was right. A clean, dark dress. Simple jewelry. My hair pulled back. I wanted to look exactly like who I was the moment I walked in, not what I was about to reveal. Because the reveal had to land properly. I drove to my parents' house on Thanksgiving with Sophie in the back seat, singing to a playlist she had built herself, and I felt something in my chest that was not quite calm and not quite nervous. It was something in between. Focused. Like a door that has been locked for years that finally has a key in it. My father opened the front door when we arrived. He smiled his performance smile. He said, "There she is." He looked down at Sophie and said, "My beautiful granddaughter." He looked at me and said, "Glad you could make it." Not warmly, flatly. Like my presence was a courtesy being extended. Inside, I could see the dining room already set. The good china, the candles. And at the far end of the room, already seated, Marcus Webb looked up from his glass and met my eyes. He gave the smallest nod. I walked inside. "You know exactly what kind of dinner it is going to be by the way your father arranges the seating." He put Marcus at one end and himself at the other. He put Sandra next to Marcus. He put me at the back corner next to the kitchen door. There were 14 people at the table. My mother's sister and her husband. 2 of my father's colleagues and their spouses. My brother-in-law. Sandra herself, who arrived late and beautiful and was immediately ushered to the Marcus-adjacent seat by my father in a way that Sandra did not appear to notice, but that I noticed completely. Sophie sat beside me. My aunt sat across from us and smiled the way she always smiled at me, with that particular shade of pity that people reserve for relatives who they believe have not quite made it. The dinner started with my father's brand of performance hospitality. He was charming when he needed to be. He pulled out stories. He asked Marcus questions about the hotel industry that were clearly rehearsed in their casualness. He made sure everyone at the table knew who Marcus was, without making it look like he was trying to impress anyone. Marcus was polite. He answered. He did not volunteer more than asked. He ate. He watched. I watched Marcus watch the room, and I thought about the day he stood in the doorway of room 914 and asked if my clipboard was a systems log. The main course arrived. My mother had outdone herself. My father refilled everyone's glasses. The room was warm and loud in the specific way Thanksgiving rooms get warm and loud. Everything overlapping, people talking over each other, a comfortable noise that makes you feel like you belong somewhere. And then my father stood. He raised his glass. The table quieted. He cleared his throat. His eyes moved around the room slowly, the way they always did when he was about to say something he had planned. He said, "I want to take a moment to introduce the people at this table since we have a distinguished guest with us tonight." He introduced his colleagues. He introduced his brother-in-law. He introduced Sandra last before me, giving her title and her hospital and her specialty with the fluency of a man who had memorized it years ago and rehearsed it many times since. The room applauded lightly. And then he looked at me. He said, "And this is my younger daughter, Claire." A small smile, a breath. "She works at a hotel." Another breath. "In housekeeping." A man at the far end of the table started chuckling, then another. My father joined them. The laughter spread like something liquid, filling the spaces between the candles and the crystal. Sophie went very still beside me. She did not reach for my hand this time. She looked straight ahead at her plate. She was 9 years old and she understood exactly what was happening, and the fact that she understood it was the thing that moved through me like something breaking clean. I looked at my daughter's face. I looked at my father, still smiling. I looked at Marcus, who had not smiled, who was holding his glass without drinking from it, who was watching me with an expression that said, "Your move." And I thought about 6 years of silent Sunday phone calls. I thought about every dinner where I looked at my plate and let it pass. I thought about Sophie asking if cleaning was something to be ashamed of. I thought about a conference room where a number with 6 figures on the left side of it was put in front of me, and I kept my hands still and did not let my face move. I had learned how to wait. I was done waiting. I placed both hands flat on the table. I pushed my chair back. I stood up. Every single conversation in that room stopped. My father looked up. His expression shifted, just slightly. The smile did not disappear completely, but something behind it went uncertain. He had never seen me stand up before. Not like this. Not in this room. I said, "Since we are doing introductions, let me do mine properly." There is a particular silence that happens when a room realizes it has made a mistake. It does not come with noise. It comes with a stillness so complete that you can hear the candles breathing. I did not raise my voice. I had learned that lesson long ago. Loud does not mean powerful. Quiet and clear is what actually reaches people. I said, "My name is Claire Donovan. I am 33 years old. I have a daughter named Sophie, who is sitting right here, and she is the best thing I have done with my life." I looked at my father. And for the past 6 years, yes, I worked at the Harrington Grand Hotel in housekeeping. That is true, and I want everyone at this table to understand something about that. The room had gone completely silent. Not the polite quiet of someone making a toast, the frozen, uncertain silence of a group of people who could feel the temperature of a room changing and did not yet know what it meant. I said, "Cleaning rooms is real work. It is physically demanding. It requires precision. It requires stamina. And it requires the kind of attention to detail that most people in far more celebrated professions do not have. The people who do that job every day deserve to be spoken about with respect, not used as the punchline of a dinner party toast." I watched my father's face. The smile was gone now. In its place was the expression he used when he was trying to calculate how to regain control of something. I said, "But since Dad has decided that what we do for a living defines how we should be introduced, I would like to give my complete introduction." I paused for exactly one breath. 18 months ago, I co-founded a hospitality consulting firm called Donovan Web Consulting Group. That company was acquired this fall by Langford Group, a national consulting firm. My share of that acquisition was $1,800,000. My formal title at the time of acquisition was co-founder and director of field intelligence. The room did not move. I looked at my father. I said, "So when you introduce me in the future, that is the complete sentence." For a moment, nobody spoke. My father had gone a color I did not have a name for. My mother's hand was at her mouth. My aunt was looking at the centerpiece like it had said something offensive. Sandra was perfectly still. The 2 colleagues who had laughed the loudest were now extremely interested in their plates. And then Marcus Webb set his glass on the table with a quiet, deliberate sound. He looked at my father. He said, "Gerald, I have to tell you something." My father turned to him. I could see the effort it was taking to hold himself together. Marcus said, "When you invited me here tonight, you told me you were interested in exploring a partnership with your real estate company." A pause. I should have mentioned this earlier. Claire and I have worked together for the past 4 years. She is one of the sharpest operational minds I have encountered in 30 years in this industry. The work that she developed was the foundation of everything we built at Donovan Webb. He looked at my father with a directness that was quiet and total. "The partnership discussion I came here tonight to consider was the one your daughter and I have already been having for months, about what she wants to build next." Another silence. longer this time. My father said nothing. There was nothing to say. Sophie looked up at me from her seat. Her expression was wide open, lit, a little stunned. She whispered, "Mama." I put my hand on her shoulder. I said quietly, just for her, "I know." I sat back down. I picked up my fork. I ate my Thanksgiving dinner. The room around me slowly, awkwardly reanimated, voices returning in small, careful clusters, nobody quite sure what the shape of the evening was anymore. My father did not make another toast. He did not host another holiday dinner. Not that year, not the year after. The table had shifted, and it never quite went back. The drive home that night was quiet. Sophie sat in the back seat and looked out the window for a long time. Then she said, "Mama, were you always that brave?" I thought about it. I said no. I said, brave is not what it was. Brave is a decision you make in a moment. What I had done was something slower. I had chosen, every single day for 6 years, to keep going even when the people who were supposed to believe in me had already written my ending for me. That is not bravery. That is patience. That is refusal. Your silence is not weakness when you are building. Your stillness is not surrender when you are waiting for the right moment. And your worth is not determined by the table that dismisses you. It is determined by what you do in the years they are not watching. Sophie got her bike with the extra gears that December. My father has not made a joke at my expense since, and Marcus Webb is still the best professional partner I have ever had. If this story moved something in you, please subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. The next story coming your way is one you are absolutely not going to see coming.